Wes Gerber.
Hey, Daniel, how are you?
Hey, pretty good, my friend. Welcome to the Edge television broadcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. Thank you again.
All right, very good. Well, you're talking to the right man, Wes. I see in your bio that we grabbed from your website that we put into the Edge's homepage there for your bio section. It says that I guess it all began where you were surrounded by several Sasquatch type creatures, but I've got a few of my own, as our longtime listeners know, of encounters in a sort of way, and so we'll get into that tonight. So you're in friendly territory, so. I imagine sometimes you'll get on a program, you might have some hostility, but let's get to it, Wes. That's what it says right there. In 2012, you claimed that you were and your brother Woody were surrounded by Sasquatches. Can you give us a story? Take it from there.
Yeah, what happened is we went out one night. We went out for a drive, and we kind of got turned around. It's kind of a long story. It's kind of a depressing story why we were going out for a drive. But my dad had passed away from cancer. My grandfather had died from cancer, all within a couple of months. And so one night I just wanted to go for a drive. I wanted to get out. I wanted to just go talk. And funny enough that I do a podcast now, I'm not really that big of a talker. You know what I mean? And neither is my brother. But we just had a rough time, and we decided to go out for a drive one night, and we were just talking on the back roads, driving down some of the back roads, and we got turned around. We were in just outside of Yakult. It's what we'd call here in the Pacific Northwest a hill, but it's called Yakult Mountain. And we pulled up, we parked. Make a long story kind of short, we had parked. We had stopped the car. We were just talking, and we started hearing footsteps coming in towards the car. And I was listening to you before I came on the air. A lot of people say, why didn't you have a camera? Well, we weren't really that big of believers in Bigfoot. I know Woody didn't believe in it at all, and I was a little bit open to it. But anyway, we park. We start hearing footsteps come in on the car, and, I'm thinking it's people coming in. I'm thinking that's what it sounded like. It sounded like something up on two legs walking through all of the leaves and just coming towards the car. And we heard three sets of these footsteps all kind of walking in on the car. We had guns in the car. I had pulled my pistol out. Woody had pulled his pistol out. And we were just in the situation where I really thought we were dealing with people. I thought, I couldn't tell you what was going through my head. It was such a weird in the middle of the night to have something walk in on you like that. And behind the car, as they're walking in on the car, behind the car, we heard something come out of the brushes. Now we're kind of on a ridge line, and we hear something come up through the bushes, and it starts growling at us. And it wasn't a growl I could place. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a cougar. I just couldn't figure out what's growling at us. And it had growled at us, and then you could hear it. It sounded almost like it was on two legs, but it's hard to describe. Not four legs. It sounded like it was kind of crawling. And it starts getting closer and closer to the car. It growls at us again. And the interesting part about the way it growled at us is the growl changed. It sounded, every time it would move up towards the car, it would growl at us, and it sounded more and more pissed off every time it moved towards the car. And again, all of this is happening really fast, so I don't really know. I'm starting to realize at this point we're kind of pinned in with the way that things were walking around the car. Now we got this thing coming up growling. And it had growled a total of 5 times at us, but every single time it would move up 5 or 6 feet, it would stop, it would do a real deep, and even to this day, the only thing I would liken it to is like a demonic type growl. I mean, there's something about it that didn't seem right. And I'm terrified. I mean, I'm shaking at this point. Woody's shaking because whatever was coming up behind us sounded huge, sounded big. And he had probably come up, maybe 3 or 4 feet from the bumper on one of the last times it had growled at us. And when it hit us with the growl, you could almost feel it as much as you could hear it. And I don't know if that was really fear. I'm not going to say that was infrasound or anything like that. I don't know if it was just fear that was taking over and I had a dump of adrenaline. But I remember feeling that I could feel it as much as I could hear it. And I caught my breath. I told Woody to back the car up. I want to leave. Whatever's going on up here, I just want out of here. Let's go. And so his hands are shaking, and he starts the car up, starts backing up, and then it kind of hits me. I'm thinking, well, I hope we don't hit this thing, whatever's growling behind us. But he backs the car up, didn't hit anything, turns the car around, and he starts driving out. Now I wish I could show you the road that we were on. The road that we're on, it's one of those back mountain roads to where the max you could do down these roads is like 10, 15 miles an hour because there's so many potholes. The roads are rough. They're not kept at all. Mm-hmm. And he drives probably 30, 40 feet, stops the car, and he shuts it off, and he's like, I can't get us down the mountain. And he's still shaking at this point, and I'm still shaking. And so, I'm cussing him out. I'm yelling at him. I'm swearing at him and telling him, let's go. And he's just like, hey, man, I just need a minute. I just need a minute. And I guess looking back now, I can understand why he said that, because even when you're on your game coming down this road at night, after even a couple cups of coffee is kind of tricky. But he stops the car, and then he's looking out the driver's side window and kind of looking up. And there's a row of trees on that side. And on that side of the mountain edge, off that edge is the Lewis River. And so we're sitting up on this ridgeline. He's looking up in this tree, and he kind of turns and looks at me, all wide-eyed, and he says, "Do you see what I'm looking at up in this tree?" And so I kind of leaned over and just looked out the window and looked up. I mean, it looked like a person in a tree. I mean, not a person. I would say more like a chimpanzee. It reminded me of a person, but it moved around like a chimpanzee. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but it had kind of wrapped its arms around the tree, had its legs wrapped around the tree, and it was doing this shifting thing back and forth. And it looked like it was looking down at us. But it just kind of looked like this black figure in a tree. And so I sit back down on my seat, and I remember I told Woody, I said, maybe it's a monkey. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And about that time on my side of the car, I could hear this breathing. And again, it was Woody's side of the car. Now it's my side of the car. We're turned around, and just probably 10 feet, there's a wood line. And the woods are really thick. You can't see within the wood line at that spot. But I could hear this thing breathing at us. And the breathing reminded me of like a sick bear. I guess is the only way I could tell you what it sounded like. It would breathe in really hard, then it would breathe out really hard, and it would breathe in really hard. Like kind of like that's the best way I can describe it. It would just breathe in as hard as it would breathe out. And I'm telling Woody to listen to this breathing on my side of the car. Listen to this over here. And about that time, I'm looking out my passenger side window, and my passenger side mirror is right there. And I saw a black flash behind the car. And I had told Woody at that time, I want to go. Let's go. He's like, you're right. I think we're being surrounded again. I think we should go. And I just told him, whatever's going on up here, I want nothing to do with it. And so right as we're about ready to take off, this large, I say Sasquatch now, but at the time, I just said monster. This large figure steps off the berm and steps down into the road. And he wasn't quite proportioned like we're proportioned, but he takes a couple steps, he walks across this road, and he kind of turned his whole body and his head and kind of looked at us, and then would take, one small step, kind of turn and look at us. I mean, he was taking a sweet time getting across this road. And, we're screaming and yelling, what the F is that and all, everything else. He walks across the road and he goes behind this deadfall tree. And the deadfall tree, we went back about a month later, Daniel, and measured the deadfall tree. But and the deadfall tree was probably about 8 feet up. And he stood a good 1.5 feet, 2 feet above that. But he would stand behind this deadfall tree, and then he would come out to the middle of the road, and he would do this thing where I thought for sure he was going to rush us. He would get down like you'd see a runner get down and pump. And that's basically what he would do. He'd start pumping, and he's in the middle of the road, and we're basically looking at each other, and he's pumping. Like, I remember seeing the backside of him pump up, just like you'd see a runner. And then he'd stand up, and he'd walk back behind that deadfall tree. And he would come out, and he would do the same thing, act like he was going to charge us. And then he went back behind the tree. And Woody and I disagree on how many times he came out. Woody says 5 or 6 times, but I think it was a lot more than that. Mm-hmm. And so we're focused in on this one behind this deadfall tree. And off to our right, there's this white thing jumps off of the berm, and it's in midair. And it wasn't as big as this other one. It wasn't even halfway as close as big as this other one. But it was skinny, but it was white, and it jumped off this berm, and it lands in the middle of the road and bounces off of it like a trampoline and goes across the road and into the bushes, and it's gone. The larger one stepped back out in the road, and he dropped all fours. But the way he dropped all fours was, it's not like how you and I would get down on all fours. He like collapsed, I guess is the best way to describe it. He just went from a complete standing position into a complete collapse, and now he's down on all fours, like within a split second. And he kind of moved with his fingers and his back toes, but it wasn't an uncomfortable position for him to be in. I mean, he looked just as comfortable on all fours as he did up on 2 legs. And he crawled out in the middle of the road, stopped for a second, and then went off to the same side that white one jumped off of. And he goes into the bushes, and he was gone. And I'm telling Woody, go, 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 go. And he starts a car, and we jam out of there. And that was kind of the cliff notes of the encounter that happened to us.
Wow. Now, so how many creatures of all kinds do you think that there were individually?
I don't know. I really don't know. At least 2,
maybe 3 or 4?
I know there was at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
But could there have been more? I don't know. We heard them walking in. Could there have just been 4 of them? I don't know, to answer your question. 3 for sure.
Okay. Wow. But when you describe the tall, slender one with white hair, it almost seems to be a different species, does it not?
No, well, not really. What I would compare it to, the big one that walked across the road, the only thing I would compare it to is like a huge bodybuilder, huge football player / bodybuilder, a giant, really, that's done too many steroids in his life and is just a monster. The one that jumped across the road, it had the same type of form as the other one, but it was just small. It was skinny. It was more like built like a runner. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question, I mean, I'm assuming they were all the same species.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But then whether there were 3 or 4 or 5, you believe that they were traveling together?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do. I think my honest opinion is they were heading down to the river. Mm-hmm. I've gone up to that mountain several times since then. And I think what they're doing is they come down to the river at night. And the river right there is beautiful. I mean, you literally can drink the water right out of your hands. It's so clean. That comes off of the mountain right there. And there's fish in the river. I think they were coming down and we cut them off is what I think happened.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a number of questions coming. We'll get to them, then we'll get back to our discussion, Wes. This is from, and we get 2 sources of incoming questions. One's from our live chat. The other is from our Fast Blast, which is an email client. This one's from the live chat, avatar named Sugarfoot. Does a Sasquatch have ears like human, or was it more animal-like? Were you able to see through the hair and see the ears?
I really wasn't. It was too dark to really see the face.
Okay.
I guess to answer, what was her name? Sugarfoot?
Yeah.
That's awesome. From talking to witnesses over the show, they appear to have the same type of ears as human, except for they're a lot smaller and they're in a little bit of a different spot from the witnesses that I have had a daytime up close personal encounters.
Okay. And this one here is from Cleet out of the live chat. You did mention you had a gun. So the question then, well, it's actually Dreamwalker. It says, did you get a shot at the creature? Did you take a shot, whether the camera or the gun?
No, on both of them. I wasn't really thinking. People have to understand the road that we were on. There's only one way in, and there's only one way out. And so it's not like we could just back up and turn around. I mean, the thing was blocking our way out. And a camera really didn't even cross my mind, to be honest with you. I didn't know what it was at that time. Yeah. I just thought it was monsters running loose. Mm-hmm. But no, we didn't take a shot either. I would have shot it if it would have charged. I think looking at the size of him, the 45 was just going to upset him. It wasn't going to put him down. Okay.
All right. And then this question is from Baby Wolf in the UK, who stays up late to watch our program. Have you got any reports of Sasquatch activity in the UK?
I haven't spoken to any witnesses. I have seen some newspaper articles. I haven't done a whole lot of looking into the UK. So I guess to answer her question, no, I haven't.
Okay. Now, I'm looking on one of these computer monitors at your website, the Sasquatch Chronicles podcasting. Now, so there are various stories in there. Are these the people that are your stories, or these people that call in and give you the stories?
No. Yeah, these are the witness encounters. Okay. These are the people that the whole show's based on witness encounters. Those are the people I really wanted to talk with.
Nice.
And I'm grateful to them and my audience because I've learned so much. Mm-hmm. But all of the shows you see in there, that's witnesses I've had on the show.
Okay. And now, has it been going since 2012?
2013.
2013. Okay. And I didn't go through to see how many, but how many testimonies, eyewitness accounts do you, just in general, have you, just in your personal walk and sphere of influence, have you dealt with or listened to?
For every one show I do, I probably have spoken to at least 10 or 15 people. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm up to, 224, 225 in shows right now. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 witnesses on at a time. Okay. But I guess a lot to answer your question.
Have you ever heard of a lady called Sarah Brown?
Yeah.
And now is she in Washington as well?
Yeah, she's in Washington State.
Well, interesting. Doesn't that what you're describing correspond with some of the things she said?
Yeah, Sarah actually had these things on her property. I've been out to Sarah's property a couple times. We found tracks. There's great vocalizations out there. They seem to be a little bit more live and let live. It's been a while since I've been out to the property, but they haven't had really any sort of aggression on the property. Some strange vocals, very aggressive vocals at night, but nothing towards the Browns.
Okay, I'm gonna give you my own vocalization. I've done it. Myself, and I'll tell you and I've got several close encounters, so to speak, in that genre there, in the genre of the Sasquatch. But I was ghost hunting. I really wouldn't call it it wasn't ghost hunting. I was with my 2 of my sons in the graveyard, and there was a lot of paranormal activity there. The whole story is, and so sorry for the people that's heard this before, but this kind of goes with you, and I'll give you the backstory and how it was. They reported to me that there was extreme paranormal activity at this particular graveyard, so I went with them to get them, to make sure they weren't getting in trouble at 2 a.m. in the morning running around a graveyard. So I'm going in as a skeptic, and so. I said, well, what are you guys up to? And we were at a graveyard, and in the woods, which it was completely black, something was in the woods. And so, okay, well, you're going to figure an animal. Now, in the state of Indiana, you're going to get possum, a deer, various rodents, small animals. There's nothing large at all. Maybe a coyote. But what I heard was in there, and here's the vocals. Now, pardon me if this is goofy, man, but this I'm going to give it to you. See if you heard anything like it. But it goes, just like that. I'm thinking, okay, that's not a coyote, that's not a deer, and that's not a raccoon. I thought it was some kind of bear. It was very low and growl. That was my voice is a little off right now, but it was actually a little bit deeper and growlier than that. It reminded me of perhaps a bear. There are no bears in Indiana, but it was something in there, and it was vocalizing towards us. Is that any kind of sound you've ever heard or heard described?
Yeah. Or now, when you heard it, was it more like a roar?
Yeah, it was a roar.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have heard that. About a month, 2 months after our encounter, we went back up to the mountain, and again, the huge argument between me and my brother. I told him I didn't want to go back to the same spot, and he was really itching to get back out because he wanted to know what was going on, and so we go back up there, and from top of the mountain, we heard it sounded like a lion roaring. Is the best way I can describe it. But I have heard that before, and I actually have heard witnesses describe that. I heard that down in Texas too. It sounds like a lion roaring. It's not quite like a bear. It's a lot more, seems bigger and louder than a bear.
Yeah, I would agree. Exactly what I heard. It was deeper and growlier and some kind of larger bear. And when you hear it, I've lived in Indiana a long time, and basically here in the Midwest, there's not a whole lot that goes on, and there's not a whole lot of it's particularly Indiana. Most of the forests have been cleared years ago, so there's only various patches, and so. There's not a lot that can hide in there, but yet I've got even more stories than that coming up with you that I'll relate to you. But let's get to another question. This is from None of Your Business. That's an avatar name, of course, out of the live chat as well. Have you ever heard of sightings of Bigfoot children or spawn or whatever you call them?
I have. And a lot of those people are hard to get to come on the air because what they're expecting to see is, 8-9 foot tall primate. And what they end up seeing, I have had witnesses on. I'm trying to think of a specific story to tell you. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but to answer the question, I have had witnesses on that have described seeing 4 to 5 feet tall, what appears to be a chimpanzee, running on 2 legs. And, I would assume that those are the younger ones. Mm-hmm. I was up at the Olympic Peninsula with the Olympic Project doing an expedition up there. And one of the guys actually has a track cast of this tiny little foot. It's probably about the size of your hand or smaller. And it has 5 small toes on it. And it looks like a Sasquatch track, just a really tiny version of one. Mm-hmm. It's, shaped like Fred Flintstone's feet, and it's got 5 toes, and it's just this tiny little track. So they are out there. People do see them. I think generally when people run into them in the forest, what they're running into is usually the large alpha male most of the time.
Mm-hmm. If you had to guess, and that's interesting, you said that it was sort of clinging to a tree. If you had to speculate on where they live, would you think cave, digging in the ground? And then I want to go into whether or not you, as some believe, concur or accept the hypothesis that they are interdimensional beings, and you're never going to find a lair, so to speak.
Well, as far as where they stay, I would be guessing, giving you my best guess. I'll say that. I think what they do is they build nests and they sleep on the ground. And it's usually like out here in the Pacific Northwest, you can walk 5 or 10 feet into the forest and not really see 2 or 3 feet above ahead of you because it's so thick. And I think what they generally do is they make nests and sleep on the ground. I don't think that they'll utilize anything they can. I've had reports from people of them coming out of old abandoned homes in the middle of nowhere. I've had reports of people seeing them go in and out of caves. But if I were to, my main answer on that would be that they probably sleep on the ground, build nests. There's one that the Olympic Project's looking into where what appears to be a bunch of gorilla nests, and they found them here in Washington State. And I was talking to one of the researchers, Shane Corson, and he said they're huge. You could, it looks like something between 10 and 11 feet tall built these nests to land. He laid in one. He's almost 6 foot tall, and there was a good 4 or 5 feet still of room. Mm-hmm. And I've had reports of them in Texas too. I had a guy, he was a law enforcement officer out hunting, and he came upon what he called a nest, and he thought it was a bear sleeping. and he was within 10 or 15 feet of this thing, and it pops up on two legs. He said in a blink of an eye it was up on two legs and looking at him, and then it took off running. He wasn't on a normal trail. He was just walking in the middle of nowhere, and he came upon this. He said it looked like a gorilla's nest. He looked it up online, looked to see what a gorilla's nest looks like, and he goes, "That's exactly what I saw."
Wow. If it did have that sort of instant reaction, it could bode well for those who sort of maybe trip on one, or get into one's area, and then they instantly hear it and instantly just take off, and so therefore you may never see it. Now I have seen some depressed areas out in forest. It looks like it's laid down. I always believed it was maybe deer laying down. I never did do a Google search on that. Do deer sleep laying down? I don't know. I mean, because cows, they sleep standing up, but you can help them sometimes by something we call in the Midwest called cow tipping. That's what have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
You run up on a cow at night and you just hit him with your shoulder, man. 2 or 3 guys, boom, and he goes down. But most people do that aren't sober anyway. But anyway, so could it be that I've mistaken Sasquatch nests for deer nests?
It's possible. I mean, all of this is more or less theories and guesses. When you see something too big for, an elk to be bedding down or any other animal where it really doesn't make sense, a lot of these, what you'll find is if you look at gorillas, I'll send you some pictures of it, Daniel, but if you look at like a gorilla's nest, that's what people are describing. They're describing what appears to be bedding, that was placed there. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times with these things, if they can be up in a higher altitude and sleep during the day, it's, like any smart predator is going to leave its, an option to get out and a quick, easy exit.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, I just got a live chat. Chuck in Florida just said that, in fact, deer do sleep laying down. So thank you for that, Chuck. Now, I'm sure, from your description of your story that, you guys weren't Bigfoot hunters at all. Obviously, there were some things going on, and so you're at a place, just trying to, get things together. And so, you probably weren't out there looking for UFOs. You weren't looking for Sasquatches. So you're sort of a blank slate. And I like that approach, rather than somebody who's looking for one, and then maybe, everything that, when they see a bear pod laying on the ground, there's Sasquatch, so it didn't sound like that's your story at all. But since this traumatic event, and it sounded like it was, even though you're in monotones there a little bit, did you go into research, say, where's the first sighting? Have you immersed yourself in Sasquatch lore books, different things, and get into the different, I know you're doing this program, you've done Coast to Coast, of course, however many else, and you've got your own podcast, but have you just immersed yourself in the Sasquatch information?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize for the monotone. I just
No, I didn't mean it that way. No, what I meant was you toned it down because you said that you were in a traumatic experience, and so you were laying that very calculating out there. But I did not mean, no, your voice is perfect. In fact, it sounds awesome. But so that's what I meant on that. But so you have immersed yourself in the lore.
Yeah, absolutely. At the time, I just thought it was monsters. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I had a hard time sleeping after the encounter. Every time I closed my eyes, I would hear the growl. I just became obsessed with it. And what I ended up actually doing is, the interesting thing is I didn't really look into it a whole lot. I looked into it a little bit, but what I wanted to do was create a safe place for people to tell their encounters. That's really what I want. I wanted to hear people's encounters, is what I wanted to hear. Mm-hmm. And I started reading some online, trying to learn as much as I can on the topic. And it's an interesting topic to get into. There's a lot of crazies in the Bigfoot world. Oh, yeah. And so that was kind of the most research that I can say that I've had is just from talking to eyewitnesses. Mm-hmm. And it was a struggle in the beginning to get eyewitnesses to come on. I couldn't get anyone to come on the show. I could get all the researchers in the world to come on the show, but that's not really who I wanted to talk to at the time. I really wanted to talk to the witnesses and share encounters, and that's the bulk of where I've gotten most of my information, is talking with the witnesses.
Mm-hmm. one of the earliest Sasquatch encounters that I remember hearing about was, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you know or don't know, but I think it was a preacher was walking or on a horse, and he was abducted by Sasquatches in early America and taken to their camp. Did you ever hear that story?
Are you talking about the Albert Otzman story?
Could be. Was he a preacher?
He wasn't a preacher. He was a miner, and he was heading out. It happened in British Columbia. Is that the one you're describing?
Yeah. Go ahead and give us that story if you know
it. Albert Otzman, he was heading out doing some work. I can't remember the year it happened in off the top of my head, but sure. I did a whole show on Albert Otzman. And he met an Indian guide. The Indian guide was telling him about the Sasquatch. Watch out for the Sasquatch. And he told him he didn't believe in any of it. So anyway, he heads out. He gets all his supplies, heads out. And around his camp at night, he would start to notice things being messed around with. And he said he was a heavy sleeper. He was he snored. Not much woke him up at night. And in the morning, he would realize someone had been in his camp. There was stuff moved around, looked like someone had gone through his bag. And so the following night, he was going to wait up and see who it was. And he ended up falling back asleep. And again, his campsite kind of things get moved around, pots get knocked down. They go through his bag again. So he does a perimeter check the next day and comes back and decides this time he's really going to stay awake. Well, Albert ended up falling asleep in a sleeping bag, and he says what happened was the next thing he remembers is being picked up and still being stuck in his sleeping bag and not being able to get out. And he was kind of in this half-seating position in a sleeping bag. And he says he was carried for many miles, and then eventually he was dumped out. And as the sun was starting to come up, he looks over to these four creatures looking at him. There was two small ones, there was a female, and the large male, and they were just chattering back and forth. He says something to the effect of like monkey chatter. They just talk really fast. He couldn't understand anything they were saying, and they appeared to be half animal and half man, and he didn't know what it was. And he tried leaving, and every time he tried leaving this camp area, they didn't harm Albert, according to Albert's story. They never harmed him. They were never aggressive, except for when he went to leave. The big male would stand. They were in some sort of overhang, and he would stand on the only way to get out of there. He would stand there and prevent Albert from leaving. So Albert would go back, sit down, and this went on for a while. And one day, what Albert ended up doing, he was chewing snuff, and they would always the creatures, he said, would always sit and watch him, but watch him from a distance. They would sit 20 feet away and just sit and watch him.
Wow.
And they seemed really interested in the snuff. And so his last day there, he takes out the can and hands it to the adult male. The adult male grabs a can and shoves the whole thing in his mouth and begins coughing and gasping and vomiting. And it jumped up and ran for the river, and Albert had claimed he grabbed his rifle, grabbed what he had, and went for the only way out of this place. The female gave chase. Albert turns around, fires a shot over her head, and he said that stopped her from chasing him. And then he made his way back down out of the mountains. And I think he was a couple months late or a month late from when he was supposed to return. And he ended up telling John Green, many years later, he ended up telling John Green the story. John Green, one of the famous researchers, he wrote in his book, he believed Albert. And Albert never wavered from the story. To the day he died, he never wavered from the story. He never said, hey, I made it all up. He never... and that was kind of the story of Albert. I think he died in the 70s.
Wow.
I could be wrong. I think he died in the 70s.
Okay, that's 70s, 1970?
Yeah, 1970s.
Okay, right.
It was 60s or 70s. I think he died.
Okay. All right. So, so that is an interesting story as well. Let me get to another sort of encounter. And again, the folks may have heard this story before, but again, a couple of my guys, my children there, were playing in the woods with playing airsoft, which is a game where you shoot. You know, they had them and their friends were out by this river here locally, and this goes to your white issue there. And I got a couple things that just turned up strange on that, but they saw something white moving through the forest, and so they threw a big log at it across the river. It was a cut log, and they were able to heave it over there, and then they threw it over there and took off. And then I didn't know this was going on. The next morning, a log was on one of my son's truck. It was it's stuck in his mirror, between the mirror and the cab. And I asked him,
really?
I said, what's that log doing on your truck? And he said, there's no log on my truck. And I go out there, and there was. He said that was the exact log that they heaved across the river at whatever this white thing was. That was, and you mentioned going back and forth. It was going back and forth behind a tree, and they said it was white. And so, you know, that was amazing. That was because I didn't know anything about it, and we were miles away from that river where we live. So whatever it was, the synopsis had to be it smelled or trailed or ran or knows things that we don't know. And put that log, and it was very interesting. That pretty much scared the crap out of everybody. But so just recently, I was telling that story to a friend of mine, and here in Indiana, and he said that 2 creatures that were white were killing the cattle in his field. He said he had 3 calves that were killed, and so he did, and then he said that he started sitting out there, kind of looking, and then he saw 2 white creatures by a fence. He said they were like big. He could only describe them as massive. Look from the distance, he said was like massive dogs. And then he was reticent to tell that story, but he told that to another farmer, and that farmer said, "Really, I've been holding back my story because something white has killed 5 of my calves." So,
oh, wow.
What is it with white? Is that indicate that there is in fact a Sasquatch creature that is white?
Well, I think they come in different colors. Probably the most common one reported is an auburn color. I do get reports of white ones. You know, I'd probably say auburn, black, white, and then kind of a blondish color is probably the 4 most common colors. And I think just like dogs, dogs come in different colors. I kind of think that's how it is with these things. Now, going back to the farmer, he said they look like dogs.
Yeah, very, very large dogs, and I think both sightings were at a distance.
Mm.
I mean, it is possible. I mean, now, and I know that you, as a reasonable individual, when you hear stories, you want to dice through it, and I'm sure you don't automatically default to, it's a Sasquatch. I mean, the best way to do it is through elimination. What's in the area? What sounds? Could you have mistaken it? And really, because one mistake of identifying a dog as a Sasquatch and your credibility is ruined. So I'm sure you dice through when you hear these stories, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's not that I question what he's saying. I think it's interesting what he's saying, because I've heard that sort of creature before. I had a guy that on the show, and he was a professional game hunter. And this guy's been, hunting his whole life, and he'll go out to different properties. He'll get rid of wolves. This guy's a professional. He's created some of the calls that you buy from the store. Most of those are his call. So this isn't his first rodeo out in the woods. And what he said he saw, he was doing a call. I think it was a wounded rabbit and something else. It was some new call he was trying out. And he said what he saw come down the ridgeline was a huge dog, a huge wolf, biggest wolf he'd ever seen in his life. But there was something strange about it. And so it keeps coming in closer and closer to where he was doing the call. And he said this thing stood up on 2 legs and was sniffing the air. And he said, Wes, it looked like a dog. It looked like a wolf. It had the body of kind of, standing up. I could see how you could confuse it for a person. He goes, but the proportions were different. He goes, but this thing actually stood up, sniffed the air. I looked through it, through my scope. And he goes, I had a headshot on the thing. I just didn't know what it was. And so I didn't want to shoot it unless it was going to come in and harm him. And so he's watching the thing, and he's describing the face. He said it had a black tongue, had small eyes, but he said it had like a wolf's head. And he said that as soon as it caught wind of him, it must have caught wind of him because it kept sniffing the air, it dropped down to all 4s and took off. He said as it was heading out, it had popped up on 2 legs and took off running on 2 legs too as well. And to this day, he was like, "Hey, man, I don't think it was a Sasquatch. I have no clue what it was." So that's why I was curious about the dog reference.
Well, no, I'm very glad you said that, because now I'm not me tooing here, but I do recall more of the story, and I do believe he said it did stand up on two legs, and so I'm going to say it was perhaps a gigantic albino wolf. But on the other hand, it could be fitting more of the identifiers of a Sasquatch type of entity, and that's where I was going with that. All right, we have a question here. This is from the Fast Blast. Tony from Arkansas says, have you had any reports of Bigfoot activity in central Arkansas, and is there any relationship between Sasquatches and UFO activity?
To answer the second part of the question, the only UFO reference I've ever had from a guy, he had a property and he had a lot of Sasquatch activity on his property. He was showing me pictures of prints, showing me all kinds of stuff. It looked like figures, and the blob squatches is basically what he was sending me. But he had some of the best audio I'd ever heard in my life. And he was telling me, he goes, I think they're aliens. And I asked him, well, why do you think they're aliens? And coincidentally on this property, he sent me another video. It looks like a disc flying, right at sundown, right over his property. And so I said, well, is there any connection between the two? Is it two separate issues going on? And it kind of seemed more like two separate issues going on to me in that. I believe he had legitimate Sasquatch activity, and then I believe he's seeing strange things fly over his home. What was the first part of that question, Daniel?
Have you got any reports of Bigfoot activity in Arkansas, maybe towards the Ozarks?
Yeah, I have a ton out of Arkansas. In fact, one of the best stories I ever got is from a retired NASA space engineer, and it was I believe it was on the border of Arkansas is where he had the encounter. But no, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, that whole area through there, I get a ton of reports. A ton.
Okay.
Probably more than the Pacific Northwest, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah.
You think you'd have a larger expanse of woods up there?
Yeah, the thing, yeah, you would think so. I think in a lot of those areas down there, they're losing their wildlife. There's too many homes being built. I know when I was in the Big Thicket, the one thing I noticed is constant building going on. And here in Washington State, you don't really get a whole lot of that. I mean, I can literally drive 30 minutes and be in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know if it's because there's building going on, expansion going on in those areas. Mm-hmm. People are getting more reports. There's more logging going on. I know in a lot of those southern states, one thing that keeps coming up is, I'll ask them, was there any logging going on? And they'll say, oh, yeah, just up the road, they're clear cutting. And so I don't know why I'm getting more out of there, but I do get a lot out of that area. Mm-hmm.
I'll pop back out of the picture here. I've got a picture of a gorilla nest. I think it's a gorilla sitting in there. So, speaking of gorillas, in a non-related question, Wes, what do you think about the zoo shooting that gorilla?
Boy, you're going to get me in trouble with that question.
Sure, love to.
I think it's a shame they had to shoot the gorilla. I'd like to think if it was my kid, there's no way it would have ever gotten into that enclosure because I've been watching it. But that's neither here nor there. The child had fallen into the enclosure. Now, having said that, I think, it's easy for people to say, well, that's terrible. They shot that gorilla. That's the worst thing ever, until it's your kid that the gorilla is throwing around like a rag doll. And then your opinion changes really quick, and you have no qualms about putting a bullet in that gorilla. So as a father, I guess, if it was my kid, I probably wouldn't be so brokenhearted over them shooting it. And a lot of those keepers know. They know that if they could have gotten inside that enclosure without shooting the gorilla, everyone screams tranquilize, 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 just like they do in the Bigfoot world. But it doesn't work that way. When you tranquilize a large animal, they don't just go out. There's
you just might piss them off. Sounds like.
Yeah, there's a few moments in there where it can still rip your head off. And it might even be at more risk because now it's feeling the effects of the trank. So, I guess that's the best non-answer you ever heard. To answer it, if it was my kid, I would have said shoot the gorilla.
Okay. All right, Wes, we're right at the top of the hour. We'll take a 5-minute break here. I've got your website, the Sasquatch Chronicles, in the background. What can people find if they log on over there?
You can find People's Encounters. It's SasquatchChronicles.com. I do 2 shows a week, and it's mainly just dealing with people's encounters. People come on, share their encounters, talk about what happened to them, what they saw, and I enjoy it. I really do.
Okay. All right, just down the line there. We're going to turn you down. We'll be right back in 5 minutes with you. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. All right, everybody. You're listening to and or watching the Edge television broadcast tonight. We have on our newsmaker line all the way from Washington State, Wes Germer, talking about the Sasquatch Chronicles. If you missed any of the exciting first hour, the program will begin to replay in our main player directly after the show. We'll extract the high-definition video, and we'll put it up in our YouTube channel, put it in our TuneIn radio playlist, and podcast it as well. Next week, we're going to have Jeffrey Daugherty. He claims to be the Christian whistleblower. What's he going to be whistleblowing about? We'll find out next week. A couple more weeks, Troy Anderson is going to be with us as well. So stay tuned. We're going to be right back in 5 minutes. Here we go. And welcome back to the Edge television broadcast. My name is Daniel Ott. If you missed any of the exciting broadcast of tonight, you will begin to replay in our main player. Don't forget, if we haven't had a guest on the program you'd like to see, just drop me a line at edgeam@yahoo.com. Don't forget, you can follow me on Twitter and become a Facebook friend and hear some of my fantastic stories as well. Now, let's go back to our newsmaker line and bring back with us Wes Germer. Wes, are you there?
I am here.
Oh, welcome back to the program. Wow, what a lot of events that had transpired in your life. Now, since the 2012 episode of you and your brother Woody there, have you seen any more Sasquatches?
I really haven't seen any more. I've had an experience when I was down in Texas where I had a log thrown at me. We were out one night. There's an area I was down with the Big Thicket guys, Bob Garrett and all those guys. And we were in an area to where we were hearing chattering, we were hearing screaming, we were hearing whoops, we were hearing things roar. And so some of it was close, a lot of it was out in the distance. And we heard this thing walking probably 100 yards, 150 yards in front of us in the bushes. And it had walked, well, this story is more interesting than this, but anyway, it had walked through the brush and was walking around. And I was standing there with 2 guys. One was Bob Garrett, and the other guy I had brought down. Mm-hmm. And when Bob had taken off, I looked back. Bob's running up the trail, and almost like he's going to cut this thing off. So I told the one guy I was with, I was like, well, wait here. I'm going to go see what Bob's doing. So I run up behind Bob, and Bob he goes up the trail and then starts walking away from this thing coming towards us. And so I follow him, and him and I stop, and I said, Bob, I don't hear it anymore. I go, what is that a Sasquatch? I mean, we're having this conversation, it kind of threw me off because we had a huge group out there, and they were off in the opposite direction, checking this area out. And it was just me, Bob, and this other guy. So as we're talking, I hear what sounds like, like a log being thrown in the air. It was end over end, that helicopter sound coming through the air. And I was shocked. And right in front of where Bob and I were standing was a tree. And this log had hit this tree. And I've never seen a man more calm. Bob was so calm. He had his gun out on his side. And he was asking me about this dogman print that we had found the day earlier. I mean, nothing had shooken this guy up. And I was shook up at that point. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up leaving. But when I went down there, it was more vocalizations is what you'd hear. We found a lot of prints. We tried casting some of the prints. At the time I was down there, it had been raining. But I haven't had another close-up personal encounter like that.
You mentioned the in the beginning about the Sasquatches heading to the river. It sounds like a lot of animals follow rivers. Reminded me of a friend of mine telling me a story that in southern Indiana, where there are hills and a lot of forests, he was on a train, taking CSX train, taking materials up to Crane Naval Base. It was right in the middle of the forest down southern Indiana, but it was going up a hill, and it was too heavy of a load, so they had to split the train in two. So they left his section in the forest in the middle of the night. And so he went to the caboose, and he said to some 8-foot tall red-haired Sasquatch creature on two legs was walking toward the caboose. And he said he ran inside, locked the door, but it then went down toward the White River, which is heavily wooded in that area down there too. So is it likely that if somebody is looking for Sasquatch activity, that if you sort of hang around the rivers, that is more likely than, say, in the middle of a forest? Or doesn't matter?
I think they use the rivers as kind of a corridor to travel, because especially out here in Washington State, you get out into the forest, and it's so hard to get around in the forest, but there's always a drainage system. There's always some river coming off the mountain or some creek coming off the mountain, and they cut into these mountains. And if you go down to the river and just walk along the river, it's the easiest traveled path. It's kind of the same theory as power lines. Mm-hmm. When you see a power line area, all your prey uses that power line area. It's a great place if you're a hunter to find prey. Deer to use it. A lot of predators use it. Mm-hmm. So I think they're using these waterways as a way to travel. That's my own personal theory. Mm-hmm. But I guess to answer your question, I think with these things, you're never going to run one down in the forest. It's just not going to happen. They're too fast. They're too strong. They're too agile. You're never going to run one down. I think for when people go out, it's always the people who aren't looking for them. The people camping, the people hiking, the hunters I've had on the show. They weren't looking for anything, and they ran into these things. Mm-hmm. And I guess that hopefully that answers your question.
If they are indeed mainly a terrestrial being, is it likely that they bury their dead?
That one's a tough one. I don't know that they necessarily bury their dead. Mm-hmm. I had a report one time, I think it was from Kumbo. I'm trying to remember who gave me this report, but it was a hunter, and he was up in a tree. And what he said he saw was these hogs come running out. And he said what he saw was this huge chimpanzee. And I think he shot it. I think he ended up shooting it because he was terrified. He said it ran out to the sandbar, and he said two other creatures came out and basically ripped this thing to pieces and started eating it. So, and I say that story to say this. I don't think they're all like that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that they really necessarily bury their dead. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I think they're probably like any other predator, or any other prey for that matter. Mm-hmm. When they know they're dying, they always go deep into the forest, and you never find them out here. And by the time they die, within a week, there probably isn't much left.
Yeah, and that is it. An organic animal decaying. I mean, I think you put a still motion picture on it, and within days it's gone. But even then, of course, there are bones. Now, all the time I've ever been in the forest, I've never came across bear bones, deer bones, really any kind of bones at all. And so one could say then, if a Sasquatch is dead, that the forest will consume it. But then what about there must be a massive bone structure there. But again, like I say, I haven't seen bones. Have you talked to hunters that describe what happens to deer bones or other animal bones that seem to disappear? Or do they not?
A lot of your varmints will eat the bones. They just get consumed. Mm-hmm. Even out here in the Pacific Northwest, I would say the only bones I've ever really come across is from an elk a poacher killed, and it was a recent kill. Mm-hmm. But as far as finding like a dead bear carcass, or a dead deer that's died naturally, or a dead cougar that's died naturally, mm-hmm. I can't say I've ever come across that. I think the forest consumes it. I really do. Mm-hmm. That's why we have so many different animals out in the forest. They all have their own task and role as far as recycling the forest. Mm-hmm.
All right, Chuck in Florida from the live chat wants to know, have you seen a video clip from Yellowstone Park with 5 Bigfoots walking in the snow?
I have. Was that caught on the highway traffic cam? Is that what Phil's referring to?
Well, Chuck, viewer man.
Or Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck, just let us know on that there. He'll put something in the live chat here in a second if you heard that question. And here's an interesting question from guest 732. Has Sasquatch ever been seen guarding marijuana patches?
No, but I had a guy on one time, and the story behind this is he was growing marijuana in California, and this guy was a multi-millionaire, and he had large patches. He was doing medical marijuana, and he was growing these large farms, and he kept saying the monkeys would tear apart his grow. They'd get in there and destroy some of the plants, and they were just really destructive. Mm-hmm. And so he had this little tiny shack out in the hills, and he ended up shooting one of these creatures. It had come up towards his property, and he had seen him go through his plants and kind of destroy things. And so he shot it. He opened the front door and actually shot the thing. Mm-hmm. And when he went up to it, what bothered him more than anything else is he said after it had dropped and it had died, he said the face looked very human-like, and it really bothered him. Mm. It was too big to pick up, and so what he did is he ended up wrapping chains around the legs and hooked it to his car and basically drove it down and put it in the river and let the body go. Mm-hmm. And after that incident happened, he was having all kinds of problems on the property. It's almost like they were coming back for revenge. Wow. He said one night they were trying to almost knock down his whole cabin. They would throw rocks. And it got to the point where he could no longer keep up with his crops. He became a recluse, started drinking a lot, and became paranoid about these things coming back to kill him. Mm-hmm. I would say that's probably one of the only marijuana guys I've talked to. A lot of these guys, especially with marijuana grow operations, they're pretty tight-lipped about it because of the type of work that they do. So they're very tough to get to come on the show. Is
it Washington State? So medical marijuana is okay in Washington State? What about just casual use?
Yeah, it's completely legal here. It's like, just like you buy alcohol, you can buy marijuana here. You can go in and buy everything from cookies to cakes to smoking it. It's. I don't even know if they even do the medical thing anymore because it's completely legal now. Mm-hmm.
So what would you estimate, wild guess, the Sasquatch population in the United States? Just wild guess.
I don't know. And that's a tough question to ask. I really don't know. I think there's a lot more of them than most people think out there. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to say. Mm-hmm. I think they travel in groups, kind of family groups is I think generally how they travel. Rarely do you ever come across just one. With all the encounters and all the people I've had on this show, there's always seems like there's another one nearby, or there's two nearby, or they'll hear a vocalization nearby at the time of the encounter. Mm-hmm. And so you always get the impression there's more than one. Mm-hmm. But to throw a number out there, I couldn't even throw a number out there. I really don't know. I think there's more than people think, though.
Do you have a map, either Washington State or the continental United States, and do you put like a little pin every time there's a sighting and try to isolate the location?
I haven't yet. What I've been trying to do is create a database of sightings based on the information I'm getting in, but I haven't put all that together yet. Mm-hmm. One thing that was interesting, I can tell you about collecting data, and this goes back to the Olympic Project when I was in Washington State. They had put up Washington State and all of the areas in Washington State where there was encounters. And most people don't know this about Washington State. The east side of Washington State is high desert. It's not the rainforest everyone thinks it is. The west side of the state is where your rainforests are at. And he had put up this picture of all the sightings in Washington State, and then he went to the year 2000, between 2009 and 2011, and there was no sightings on the east side of the state. However, all the sightings on the west side of the state had doubled, and he was asking anyone if they knew why. And then he put up another graph of all of the fires going on, and they were all up and down the state on the east side of the state. So almost for 2 years, there was no sightings reported on the east side of the state. However, on the west side of the state, all the reports had doubled. And so I think that information is interesting to put together to, try to develop patterns and just kind of, I don't know that you're really going to guess where they're going to be, but I'm looking into putting together some sort of database for that.
Interestingly, the facts that you described, the events that you described in the testimony, when I went back in the first hour and I gave you my impression of a growling noise that I heard, the area was known for paranormal activity using the type of gear, the electronic voice phenomena, electronic voice recorders, and actually we had some laser beam tripwires set up various places. So we were looking at paranormal activity within the framework of graves, perhaps even say ghosts. But the activity surrounding that, putting everything you said together, not only did I hear, I absolutely heard this growling noise. There's no, I'm a reasonable person. I have no reason to make anything up. But also, rocks were being, and we went out there several times, maybe 5 or 6 times. And each time there was events. One of them, there were rock throwing coming out of the forest. Another one, and you mentioned that you heard something running at you coming through the forest. Now, one event, there was a very large creature, and it was moonlit, and it was almost daylight, but something was running down the gravel driveway toward the graveyard where me and another, there's about 7 people there. We just stand there talking about what we found, and we all heard something running as fast as it could, and it was large, and you could hear the crunching of the gravel. That it was a large creature. It was running fast, coming straight towards us, and so we're looking right at it. The only possible place it could be, and we jumped back into the grave really for safety. It's like, what in the hell, And then as a final story, so there's the rock throwing, the foot stomping. And we actually, I think they had it on tape. It may have got erased. But we were there one night, and a county sheriff came up there because there was kids going up there for entertainment, and they want to make sure everything was okay. So here comes this county sheriff, and so I'm thinking, okay, here I am. I'm adding to the delinquency of minors. Well, they weren't minors, they're young adults, but still, I'm the elder there, and so I'm working on my story of what we're doing there. So he comes up. And he was walking towards us, thinking we were going to get a ticket or something, and maybe thrown in jail. And then he says, the first thing he said was, "Did you see anything?" I said, "What?" And then he said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me tell you what happened to me." He said, "Something around here has been thrown. When I come up here to check by myself, something throws sticks at me." So, putting that all together, maybe it's not ghosts throwing sticks or rocks or something running, perhaps. It does fit everything that you've described of events of other people.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I got an interesting, what is it, EVP? What is that, electronic voice phenomenon? Mm-hmm. I got a funny story about that. But before that, Yakult, the small town of Yakult in Washington State actually means haunted valley. And I talked to one of the Native Americans up there, and they refused to settle that whole area, that Yakult Mountain, just that whole mountain range in there. They refused to settle in there. And then when they first came to this area, they would get rocks thrown at them. They would hear screams. They would hear what they thought were demonic growls. They would have branches thrown at them. And so they named it Yakult, which means haunted valley. And it wasn't until later they realized that these creatures were in there. And they still refused to, that and Mount St. Helens, they refused to go into those 2 areas in Washington State because their reputation of these things isn't the best. But going back to the EVP, I had a guy on the show one time, and he said to me, he goes, he was more of a paranormal ghost hunter type guy, and he was relaying the story to me, and he was out in Texas, and he was in this one area that's notorious for Sasquatch sightings. Mm-hmm. And there's an old mine or something there. So he had set up, and he was asking, I'm not sure how you guys do it. He was asking questions to this thing, and one of the questions he asked is, do you see any Bigfoots in the area, or are there any Bigfoots in the area? And he was going to send me the EVP. The EVP came back and said, yes, they're very destructive. And I just thought that was kind of a weird, I know you're kind of a paranormal guy, Daniel, but I thought I'd throw that at you. That was just kind of a weird thing to ask and kind of a weird response to get back. And if I do get the EVP, I'll send it to you and see what you think.
Yeah, please do. Now, I'm not like chasing around for, I don't see dead people or anything like that. I just, it's sort of like I just kind of end up in places or, and my original case was to invest. I want to get to the bottom of it. What's going on, and like I say, you always whenever you get a report, you got to say, well, it could have been this, could have been that, and then at some point, you end out what could have been, and it may in fact be what you really don't want it to be, which is either a paranormal or some kind of creature. Interesting, you called it a monster. When you described in the first hour, Wes, your encounter with this Sasquatch group, it almost sounds like a movie, like you see, a couple of people in a car and there's something out there, and it was like did you feel like you were in a horror picture, in a sci-fi movie?
I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. I couldn't figure out what was going on, especially when we first had pulled up and we're sitting in the car. People did not make sense, but it's the only thing that made sense to me. I know that's kind of a double negative, but honestly, the only thing that made sense is it was people. And as we sat there, and I felt like we're in the Twilight Zone. When I got home after the whole encounter, I sat down on the bed and looked at the wall for about 3 hours and couldn't stop my knees from shaking, couldn't stop my hands from shaking. It felt like a bad dream is what it felt like.
Mm-hmm. This is from Tony in Arkansas again. It says, have you got any new reports about mountain giants?
I haven't gotten any new reports. I know what he's referring to, Daniel, is I have a guy on, his name's Duke, and he comes on the show and he does mountain giants. We talk about mountain giants, which is a separate issue from Sasquatch. But I know Duke had a new one, and we're going to be having an upcoming show dealing with that new encounter that he just spoke to the witnesses, and we're going to try and get them to come on the show.
Okay, good.
I don't know too many of the details of it yet.
Yeah, hey, let me know if that ever happens. Here's a great question from Dreamwalker out of the live chat. It says, do you think there might be such a thing as Sasquatch retrieval teams like MIBs or aliens? A rapid response team, maybe the government, or maybe whoever else would be. Do you think there is such a thing when there's a report that maybe somebody else gets involved to investigate it? Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I think there is. I think what the listener is referring to is kill teams. I do believe that they exist. I do believe that this is being covered up. I've had enough cops. I've had enough military people on the show. There's no doubt in my mind that it's being covered up.
Wow.
I've had witnesses come on. There was a lady, her son now, he's in his 60s, but his mother went out. This was back, I want to say in the 60s or 70s. His mother was a veterinarian for the state, and the father would help him. And they actually went out to a place where a snowplow had hit a Sasquatch, and it was laying on the side of the road. And she had shot it with a dart. What she said she saw was what appeared to be a large gorilla moaning and banging its hand on the ground and chattering, and she had hit it with a dart and trying to put it out. And long story short, ended up getting up and running off. And his father told him the story because he was going to go hunt in that area. And his father sat him down and told him the whole story. And what had happened is she had pictures of it too. She wrote a full report, took pictures because she had to turn all that in to get paid by the state. And his father had told him what had happened that night. And the next day they got a visit from Fish and Game and were told never to talk about it, that if they were to ever speak of this, she would lose all her contracts and they'd no longer do work for the state. And that was kind of the end of that. But I've had so many military insiders on. I've had so many cops on, cops that go out to 911 calls for quote unquote prowlers. And then they get out there and realize it's not a prowler. There's something else going on. Mm-hmm. And they're told to be quiet about it or they'll lose their job. Mm-hmm. As far as the kill teams go, I have some pretty good audio of what appears to be a kill team taking shots from a helicopter. The helicopter sounds like it has a bell on it. The helicopter's kind of quiet, and you hear automatic gunfire going off. And then you hear the roar that you and I were just talking about, Daniel. You hear this long roar, and you hear the hunter saying they're shooting it, they're shooting it, they're shooting it. I haven't had his permission yet to release it, but I'm working on him so I can release it because it is very compelling audio to listen to. And he told me what he saw was he was out hunting. He said these two helicopters flew in. he said at first he didn't notice they were helicopters. He said they were flying kind of silent. And basically when these military helicopters fly in, they have what's called a bell on them to make it more quiet when they fly through. And he said they spotlit what he thought was a gorilla out in Texas. And then there was automatic gunfire from the helicopter, and that's about when he started backing out of the area.
Mm-hmm. Somebody I know who lives in the Ozarks had a trail cam set up and captured a picture of what looks to be a monkey. Now, you don't expect to see monkeys running around the forest, but it's possible that it could be a juvenile Sasquatch. But then you have to think, well, realistically, it could have been somebody's pet, and it was not a monkey like, say, you would see a monkey if you pulled it up on a Google image search. It was more of a kind of a slender looking small ape looking creature more than a monkey. So has anybody set up trail cams that you know of to try to capture them? Have you seen any pictures of them?
Well, to going back to what you just said, in the area you're talking about, Arkansas, Oklahoma, that the sizes really aren't that big. Generally, when I get reports out of that area, the people describe it like a skinny gorilla, like the size of a basketball player, and kind of shaped like a basketball player. They don't really describe the King Kong type. I mean, every once in a while I do get those, but for the most part, what people describe is kind of slender, really tall, gorilla, like a skinny gorilla is kind of what they describe. What was your question? I'm sorry.
I said, has anybody that any of your podcast listeners, viewers, have they intentionally set up trail cams?
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, there has been a few. Generally, what I tell people with the trail cams, I'll give you an example. There's a lady in Washington State. Well, I guess I'll answer your question first before I tell the story. Generally with trail cams, what I tell people is if they're around your property, set up trail cams because they tend to avoid them like the plague. And I think the reason why they avoid them like the plague is because of the spectrum they can see in. A lot of times with these trail cams, there's a beam of light, especially with cheaper trail cams, there's a beam of light that is coming out of it. And to us as humans, we can't see it. But I think that these things can see that light. I've had a researcher on one time, and he had a night vision camera, and they were walking in on the swamp, and they had seen the creature. So they were slowly making their way in, and they were on a ridgeline looking down at it. And he's looking through the night vision camera. Well, he has an infrared light he can click on, and basically it's a beam of light that goes out, and through the night vision he could see more at a greater distance. And so they've been watching it with the night vision, and he decides he's going to flick on that infrared light, again, naked to our eyes. Mm-hmm. And he said the moment he did that, it turned and immediately looked right at them, almost like it could see the light, and turned and looked right at him. So with regard to the trail cams, most of the time what I tell people, especially if they're around your property, set up a ton of trail cams because they tend to avoid them. They tend to and you can hear those trail cams too. That's the other thing most people don't know. I've been out in the woods. I think it was after about 2 weeks, me and my brother were out in the woods, and we were hunting in the middle of nowhere. And I kept asking him, do you hear that? It sounds like like something's winding up. And it was a trail cam sitting on a tree, snapping pictures of us. Hey, but you could hear it.
Okay. Hey, listen, you said in the first hour, at one point, the Sasquatch was on or in a tree. If somebody's in the forest and suspect now if you have people say, I guess I got so many questions, but I'll try to wrap it up into something coherent. Do people hear, or do they feel like they're being looked at? And if so, should they be looking up in the trees rather than down at eye level?
Well, I usually tell people to look up in the trees. I don't think the larger ones get up in the trees. Every report I've had of them looking or up in trees seem to be of smaller ones. Mm-hmm. 6 feet or smaller seem to be up in trees. And I have had reports of people saying they saw what appeared to be a chimpanzee or a gorilla up in a tree just watching them. So I do tell people to look up, but I think, with these things, they tend to drop down to their bellies and crawl in when they're going to check you out. There's a report of one I just had on the show Friday, and it was of a hunter, and he was walking down this trailhead, and he was up on a ridgeline, and he looks down the ridgeline because he heard kids, and it was a Boy Scout camp. And he said as he looked down there, there was a white what appeared to be a creature on its belly, peeking up over the berm, looking at these kids. He said it wasn't human, but it was humanoid in shape, and it was all white. And he said it would pop its head up, and he had stepped on a branch or he had done something, and it popped up on two legs and took off running down through the swamp. So I think generally if you're going to run into them, I always look up anyway for cougars, because if a cougar is going to get you, it's going to usually come from above. But I think generally, I guess to answer your question, yeah, I would look up. But I think most people that run into them, they aren't up in trees.
A couple of years ago, you talk about the frauds, and I want to know if you believe this was fraud. The guy that claimed to capture or shot a Bigfoot and put him in a freezer, did that turn out to be a hoax?
Yeah, I think you're talking about Rick Dyer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that turned out to be a hoax.
How does that influence your work? I mean, did people come on your program, or did you get emails that say, "Look, man, it's all a big, you're a nutcase, and they're all hoaxes, and everything you've got on your website is hoax"? How do you deal with that? How does that affect your credibility or your view on the whole matter?
Are you talking about how do trolls affect me, or how does the Rick Dyer story affect me?
No. Just the frauds out there in general. I mean, I'm sure you get some people that that say that there's no such thing, and you're just chasing ghosts. But how do these fraudulent, proven fraudulent Bigfoot hunters affect your credibility?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily affects credibility. I think it makes scientists and it makes people of authority kind of shy away from looking into it when you have stuff like that going on. I'm sure it's the same in the UFO community. I'm sure it's the same in the paranormal community. Anyone that is legitimate, that makes them kind of shy away. And the general audience, your general public too watches that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that it really affects. I can't say that there's been too much that's gone on. Rick Dyer's done it a couple times. One of the things that I would say hurts the subject is all the fake videos out there, mm-hmm. Where people will actually put in the YouTube comments, "This is for entertainment purposes only, not a real Bigfoot." And then they do a pretty good fake, and it gets circulated all over social media. That becomes frustrating. But more or less, for what I do is I talk to witnesses and try and stay out of the whole researcher Bigfoot community, and just stick with witnesses and let them tell their stories. And it's everyday people, and I think that brings a lot of credibility to the subject. When you hear a police officer tell you, "I almost hit one," or I've gone down and talked to the Border Patrol agents in California, and they had run-ins with them. And so that's generally what I stay with is your mm-hmm. people's encounters, your everyday encounters.
Okay. Wes, and this question comes from guest 969. It says, I think we briefly addressed it, but let's go a little deeper on the fact. The question is, are Sasquatches, could they possibly be alien or supernatural? Well, let's just say there is a terrestrial entity that is the Sasquatch. Could there be another strain that are supernatural beings that do materialize from other dimensions, or in fact, as some claim, they always seem to have a big Sasquatch activity around UFO sightings? Could it be both of them? Could they both be true, or do you think it's just more terrestrial and the other is just hyperbole?
Well, my own personal opinion on Sasquatch is I think it's a wild animal. I think it's a wild animal that is close to us in the evolutionary tree, if you want to put it that way. But I think, kind of like chimps, I think, what is a chimp? 98% has human DNA in it. And so I kind of, that's where I lean more towards what Sasquatch is. But I have talked to a lot of sincere people that have seen strange things, as far as them just up and disappearing. And they seem like very sincere when they're telling the story. They're not trying to sell you a bill of goods. Most of the time, those people don't want to come on the air. And so I don't know if there's two separate things going on with regard to what people are seeing. There was a demonic figure back in history, and the Vikings would leave gifts for it. I want to say it was pre-Vikings, but they would leave gifts for it. And what they described was an entity that was like a giant, all black, and it had glowing red eyes. and it was the forest god, and they would leave food for it, and the reason why you left food for it is so that it would leave you alone. I don't know if people are running into another entity out there, because a lot of the encounters, I would say the bulk of the encounters are very mundane type encounters. And when I say mundane, what I mean is, I had a guy on one time that he was hunting. I want to say, I don't remember what state he was hunting in, but he was out hunting, and what he had seen was he thought it was a bear at first. And what was interesting about his sighting is he said, I thought this bear had been shot because when it was on all four legs, it was like protecting one side of its body. And he said until it stood up on two legs and kind of turned in his direction. Now, he was downwind of this thing, but he said what this creature did was it picked up a rock, banged it against a tree, and put its ear up against a tree. And it did this a couple times. And he said it sounded like wood knocks. And he said eventually it pushed a tree over, grabbed a possum, and ripped the possum in half right there, smashed it against a tree, sat down, started eating it. So you get these very terrestrial type encounters, and the very off-the-wall, interdimensional ones. I'm not saying people are lying, but maybe they're running into something else. Maybe something pretending to be something terrestrial. I don't really have an answer for what they're running into, and I don't beat those people up by any means. I wasn't there, I didn't see it, but they seem very sincere.
Having the specter of that encounter that you had, and obviously the hundreds of conversations you've had with eyewitnesses, and it sounds like they're all sincere as can be. A lot of them have credibility for sure. How does that change your outlook as far as life in general? I mean, this whole sphere, there's something, sort of like chemtrails, we're told that they don't exist, and all of a sudden, for years, and you're crazy, and for years, and in fact, or you can go to the chupacabra. I mean, that thing was said. Well, people say you're crazy. There's no such thing. Till they started turning up dead. But until they did, anyone who said there was such a thing as a chupacabra was called an idiot and a fool. So how does the whole thing that these things exist alter your view of life? Did it make any difference whatsoever?
Oh yeah, it turns your whole perception and reality upside down. Because I'd been out hunting my whole life. I had never seen anything like this. Never even wasn't my biggest worry about out there hunting. And there was times where I went hunting alone. My biggest concern was running into a cougar. I had never seen anything like this. Never heard anything like this. And so to see it, it kind of throws your whole perception, your whole reality out. Everything kind of gets thrown out the window at that point. And I would always kind of laugh at like alien encounters, for example. Or stuff like that. And now I'm not so quick to do that. Now I'm more quick to stop and listen to what people have to say, because I in this world, the truth is stranger than fiction, and there's a lot of weird things going on in this world. And anything that you think, my biggest thing whenever I come across a skeptic, and I actually don't mind skeptics at all. I think skepticism is a good thing. But whenever I run across a skeptic, I always tell them, just look into the subject. Take 2 months, look into this, and then make your mind up. Mm-hmm. Listen to people's encounters. Listen to what they run into. Listen to the sincerity. You want to hear a cop? You want to hear a judge give their encounter? A border patrol? I got the whole walks of life. You can listen to a retired NASA space engineer. Would you like to hear his encounter? And if people just take a moment and listen on what's going on, it throws your whole perspective out after you have an encounter like this. It really does. Turns your whole world upside down.
Somebody wrote in and said that the forest god that you described with the red eyes sounds a little bit like the Mothman.
Yeah, it does. The forest god, I guess it lived in the mountains, and it would come down and they would feed it. I don't know that it flew, but they described it as like a god. Mm-hmm.
All right, a number of questions still piling in here. One question for you, Wes. Could the Sasquatch be genetic experimentation by mad scientists?
I don't know that the Sasquatch is a DNA experiment. I have talked to a military insider, and they I guess I got to be careful what I say, because they actually did try and kill this person like 2 days after I spoke with them. But that particular, let me put it this way. I've talked to 3 different people now. All 3 were involved in the kill teams. And all 3 said that they were genetically altering the DNA and creating chimeras and using some of the Sasquatch for this. I haven't seen it personally, but all these 3 different people don't know each other, and they told me the exact same story on what was going on. And this is probably over a 2-year period that I've talked to them. And again, they don't know each other. No, they're not in the same area, but all 3 of them had the exact same story, that these things, they were taking the DNA, they were manipulating the DNA, and they were creating chimeras based on Sasquatch.
Well, as far as the mad scientist goes, I meant whether it's the Yeti or the abominable snowman or the Alma, the Sasquatch, Bigfoot. I mean, there have been sightings and culture civilizations for hundreds of years, predating mad scientists, I would say.
Absolutely.
Here's another one. Oh, this is interesting. Cleet wants to know: is it possible? Because you mentioned that they may have hypersensitivity or hyperperceptions that's beyond the human capability, such as hearing and seeing different parameters. Is it possible that they've developed the ability to cloak?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how you would develop that ability. It would seem like something you would either have or you don't have.
There are organisms on this planet that are transparent.
Yes, there is. Most of them, though, aren't organisms like a primate. Mm-hmm. Are you talking about plants and stuff like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's fish that are transparent, and I think there's maybe some other maybe bacterial. I've seen them, and I'm just wondering now. I'm trying to remember if those transparent ones can also sort of manipulate their outer skin to become what it is they're around. I'm not talking about like an octopus, but going from a transparent creature. And I have to look that up. But so at least that is in the evolutionary sense, that is out there. There are transparent entities. I know it's certainly fish with eyes, and then you can always see his eyes going around. All right, so let's get on to this question here. It says, from Put Yahweh First, what is the best documented Bigfoot discovery that you've heard or know of? I guess it'd be your own. You were there.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the best, that's the thing is there's been hair collected. There's been, I think the best documented evidence for these things is the audio that gets captured, because you can run the audio through and there's no other explanation. You can't place another animal with it. I've heard audio that sounds like a gorilla that was taken in Oregon. And I don't know too many gorillas out there running around, but it sounds like a gorilla that's being recorded. Wow. The other thing I would say that's probably the most interesting evidence is the track casts, the casts that people take. I know like the Elkins Creek cast. That was a very famous cast that was taken by a police officer. And I had him on the show, and he was getting called out to this property. 911 call night after night after night after night. And he would go out, talk to there was an old man and an old woman, and he was getting frustrated with them because they would say the monkeys are, killing his dog, killing his livestock, trying to break into his barn, trying to break into his house. And he thought this old man was crazy, but he would go out there, and he said every time he got a call, it was around midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, he would get a call to go out to this property. And he said after being out there, after about the 4th or 5th time, he decided to entertain the old man and actually walk around the property. And as he walked around the property, he said he saw large footprints that appeared to be man-like, but they were a little bit different they were a lot larger than your normal print. And he said there was something weird about the footprints. And when he walked over to the barn, the old man was saying it had broken into his barn. He said this thing had bent this metal door back, almost like he had folded it back. And he said there's no way, even 4 or 5 men, there's no way they could have bent the door back the way this thing bent this door back. So he goes back out the next day. He tells him after he gets off his shift, he'll come back out in the morning when the sun's up, and he'll take a look around. And he had some casting material in his cruiser. And as he's looking around, he said he had the feeling like he's being watched the whole time. He said it was the creepiest feeling he ever had in his life. He had a pistol in one hand, and he came across these tracks. And so he casted the print. And Jimmy Chilcutt, who's down in Texas, he's a forensic, fingerprint. He knows the primates, and he works for the sheriff's department. He actually sent him the track cast, and they found dermal ridges in the track cast. And so, I think that's interesting. But I would say the footprints and some of the audio and all that other stuff. I'm really starting to get into going back to the DNA question that you asked me. One of the insiders I had on, I'm starting to get into the dogman encounters. And the people I have on are very sincere. Again, it's just your normal hunters. But one of the things the insider said to me was, when people are describing this dogman type creature, they're not lying to you. And that person the military insider had told me, if you come across one, you should shoot it, because it probably will kill you. So shoot it if you see it. But Chris was saying that these things are a genetic construct. They're not a natural creature. Their DNA has been mixed around. Now, whether that's true or not, I thought I'd throw that in there for the DNA question.
There is a guy out there I tried to get on the show. I haven't, and he confirmed, but he kind of lost contact with him. I think he wrote a book called 411. Are you familiar with that title?
Yeah.
Okay. And he describes missing persons. Is it possible that the Sasquatch are abducting humans?
Well, I think that they do. I think it really depends on. I think in some situations they are taking people, especially women and children. Now, I say that to say this: I don't think all of them do that, but there has been strange cases. In one of his books, David Pilates, you're talking about, one of his books, he had talked about the Dennis Martin case of the little boy that disappeared. Went behind a tree, and he was playing hide and seek with a bunch of kids. His dad sees him. His dad's, can see him with an eyesight go behind the tree, and that was the last time his dad ever saw him. He vanished. And there was a couple coming down the trail about 2 miles away, and they said what they saw was a bear running on two legs and appeared to have a child over its shoulder. And they told the FBI agents that, and they kind of got blown away, got blown off on the whole thing. But to answer your question, yeah, I do think that they do snag people.
Mm-hmm. If I was going to get crazy and take my flashlight down to the river looking for Bigfoot activity, I'd never get close because of that flashlight would and the fact of walking around there.
Yeah, take a laser with you if you get a chance. I've been told by military insiders, and actually some of the researchers I trust, they'll tell you that if you come across one, use a laser, because it blinds them, takes away their night vision, and they don't run. They'll just stand there, but it'll stop them in their tracks if they're coming for you. Okay. To actually use a laser.
Okay, that's good Sasquatch advice right there. Somebody from Pennsylvania wrote in. Stan Gordon says whenever you track a Bigfoot, the tracks go so far, then they invariably disappear. Is that true?
I haven't had too many of those cases. I know Stan has looked into some of those, and Stan and I, as far as theories, we disagree on a lot of things, but I respect his work, and I think he does good work. Mm-hmm. These things, for example, the one that jumped across the road, if you were following his tracks up on that berm, it would have looked like he probably just vanished, because you probably wouldn't have thought to come down off the berm and start walking down the road. I mean, they cleared like 25 feet. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes when these things are walking, they'll jump. I've had so many reports of people that, going back to the Elkins Creek cast, he said when he was casting that track, the police officer I was telling you about, mm-hmm. he said the tracks just stopped, and he couldn't figure out why the track stopped. And he decided to cast a track, and on his way out, he went out a different way, and the tracks picked back up. And what he had found was it had jumped almost 30 feet up this hill, and that's where the tracks kept going. But as he found the original tracks, they appeared to just disappear. They just vanished, like it had just gone nowhere. And it wasn't until he went around that it actually been up on the hill. And so I think that sometimes Occam, you got to apply Occam's razor on some of these things.
I'm wondering, even for a deer hunter, I mean, it seems to me, maybe if you're a tracker, that if you track any animal, I don't know that you'll track them. Say you go for half a mile or whatever, that you're going to go right to where they're at. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned just a while ago about a death threat, and so somebody wrote in to you, Wes, wants to know: would you ever commit suicide?
Would I ever commit suicide? Yeah. No.
Yeah, and I'm sure where that question comes from. Those that seem to have information or on the right track.
I gotcha.
I
gotcha.
So
yeah, like Phil, I'm doing a new show, and I'm posting it up on Sasquatch Chronicles, but it's Conspiracy Corner with the Duke, the gentleman we were talking about earlier, and I was looking into that whole case, and anyway, there was reported suicide, but that guy didn't commit suicide.
Is there any recorded case of a Sasquatch impregnating a human female?
Not that I'm aware of. There's only a few native stories. Some of the Native Americans talk about that, but I don't know about that.
Okay, and I guess 969 asked this question again: how close to human civilization do you think that they've gotten? How far back in the wilderness are they found?
You really don't have to go too far. Out of all the people I've ever had on the show and all the witnesses I've spoken with, they're not as far out it's not like you got to hike in 5 or 10 miles to find them. They seem to be on the edge of civilization. Where me and my brother had our encounter, it's literally the middle of nowhere. And you can drive 25, 30 minutes tops and be standing in the middle of downtown Portland, Oregon, a concrete jungle, looking at skyscrapers. So you really I don't think you have to go as far out as you think. Especially a lot of campgrounds, they just seem to be living on the edge of civilization.
We talked about earlier in the first hour about Sasquatch, quote unquote, cleanup teams, I guess we could say. And if that be the case, would that be a conspiracy, a government cover up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're absolutely covering it up. I've spoken with people who have claimed to have shot them and get paid a visit the next day by a fish and game guy, and they're told to shut their mouth and don't talk to anyone about this. So I think these cleanup teams, one of the things, I'll tell you a quick story. The insider I had on the show is basically a DNA geneticist, and she's encamped with rangers and these special forces guys when they go out and kill these things. And she said that one of the areas they went out to kill this family, and it was hard to listen to because the insider had on, is crying the whole time while telling the story. But they went out to this area and they shot the male, they shot the 2 kids, and they had shot and wounded the female. They'd killed everyone but the female. The female was just wounded. And the insider told me she goes, they cry like we do. And it kind of threw me off a little bit. And they ended up killing the female. But the reason why they had killed this group, this is one of the reasons why that upset the insider so much. The reason why they'd killed this group, it wasn't because they were harassing humans. It wasn't because they were taking anyone. They were just being seen too much, and they were actually being filmed. They had lost the fear of humans. And so they were coming out in the open more and more and more. And so that was one of the reasons why they went out and shot this particular group. I have talked to special forces guys who've gone out and killed these things, and they told me the reason why they have these kill teams, if too many people start showing up missing in one area, they will absolutely send in a kill team because it draws too much attention. It's not necessarily a public safety concern. It's just drawing too much attention. And, I wish we had more time. I could tell you all kinds of special forces stories that I've been told, some crazy ones.
Okay, well, hey, we got a little bit more time. Give me a crazy one.
There was a guy that had contacted me, and he said that they were up on Mount Hood in Oregon, and they went in to kill this family group that was up there. and there was too many people showing up missing in this one area. They claim people drown in this one river, the Molalla River. They claim people end up drowning. There's no way you can drown in this river. It's only probably at the deepest point. I mean, it's not, I'll just put it this way. It's not a deep river. And if you ended up drowning, you'd probably wash up 100 yards down, because it'll go from a couple feet deep to a couple inches deep. And it's completely embedded with rocks. So there's no way you can drown in this river.
Okay.
But we would get reports of people that would come up missing, and in this area of Mount Hood, they would say too many people were coming up missing. So they sent in this kill team, and the guy had told me they labeled the different types of Sasquatches, like M135 or M137, and he would give different descriptions for these particular creatures. And his buddy who was with him had gotten too close when they went up, and they had tracked down one of the males and had his arm ripped off. And they ended up, he said, we lit the creature up. We shot the creature to death. And he ended up getting airlifted out. And he goes, I don't know if he'll talk to you about it, but let him know that I gave you the number and you can call him. And so I called the guy, and it was one of the strangest conversations I had ever had. He did not want to talk about it. He asked me how I knew the information, how I knew about his arm being ripped off, and pretty much ended the conversation. But you get these reports of these guys going in and taking care of the problem. One of the insiders told me, Wes, whenever you see a missing person, pay close attention to the areas where people show up missing. And what the search and rescue people, he goes, talk to the search and rescue people. And when you talk to them, what you'll find out is special forces teams will show up, go out and do their own thing. They're not there to look for anyone. Go out and do their own little thing, and then leave the area. They'll come back and leave. They never really talk to the search and rescue people. He goes, why do you think that is? What do you think they're there doing? And you had mentioned David Pilates. In his book, he brings that up several times, that special forces show up out of nowhere and don't really talk to anyone, go out, and he said they're out killing these things, especially when they're snagging people.
Wow. Wow, that is incredible. You said a report of an arm getting ripped off?
Yeah, one of the guys had gotten too close. He said that they're briefed really quick, and they had special names for them. They don't call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. They call them like M135, and that is a term that they use for the type of creature they're going after. Mm-hmm. And after all the people I've had on the show, you know, I've had people who say they look like humans. I've had people who say they look like chimpanzees in the face. Some people will describe large canines. And what the insider had told me was people are describing different types of these creatures, and some are more vicious than others. And so they had a name they would use for them, like M135, and they would say, don't get too close to this one because it will rip you in half. And it had actually ripped this guy's arm off. And I guess he's on some sort of special disability, and that was one of his biggest concerns. He didn't want to talk to me too much because he didn't want to lose his military retirement. He didn't want to lose his disability pay.
Wow.
And, you know, he refused to come on the show, but the other guy, he didn't want to come on the show either. But I get contacts from these people. And, you know, there's been 2 insiders that I've had on where I've asked them to send me military credentials or something so I know who I'm talking to. Mm-hmm. And out of the 3 people I've talked to, 2 of them have sent me their military IDs.
Nice. You got any more? Got any one more story like that? Or something?
Well, I tell you what, I got an interesting one out of Alaska I'm looking into, and it's a family in Alaska, and he told me that I spent a couple hours on the phone with him. He told me that he didn't believe in Bigfoot prior to this. They had bought a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and he said they had started noticing. Actually, it was his son, his young son, I think is 7 or 8, had said he saw monkeys in the forest watching him. And they just passed it off as imagination. Well, he kept going on and on about these monkeys he saw in the forest. And the wife had gone out and walked around, and she started noticing footprints all around their property. She had sent me pictures of all these footprints that she got, and some really good footprints. And so it was kind of a, you know, they were excited. You know, Bigfoot's on our property. It's going to be like Harry and the Hendersons. Well, it hasn't quite turned out like that. It went from like a live and let live type situation. The husband leaves for 2 weeks at a time out of town, so he's not there. And what's going on this property is she's heard them run across the roof, get up on the roof and run across the roof and jump off the house. They've come up to the windows and they'll bang on the house at night. They'll throw rocks at the house at night. She said her window sits up, I think, 10 or 11 feet off the ground. And at night she'll hear what sounds like monkey chatter. And these people really know nothing about the topic. She's just saying, have you ever heard this before? It's a real fast gibber talk. And so she's telling me everything that's going on and around the property. Well, these things have now focused their attention on the wife and the kids. And when the husband leaves, they seem to be really focused in on her. They had actually, when she's out, even during the day, she said that 2 different occasions, she had her mother there and her 2 children, and they described this large monkey running past them. And she said it had long flowing hair, and it was kind of a auburn color. And so I'm talking to the wife and the husband, and he goes, you know what, I think I have that on game cam. I have a game cam out there, and as it ran past the game cam, it snapped a picture.
Wow.
So he dug up the picture, and you see kind of a blur, but it looks like long flowing hair. I can tell you it's not a suit, and it's not a bear, and it's not it kind of looks like an ape running past this game cam. And as it had just started to leave the frame, the game cam had snapped a picture. He went out there one night. He said they were banging on the roof, and he went out with his shotgun and his flashlight. And he said what he saw looked like 2 monkeys jumping off his roof.
Wow.
And so they're on the edge of, he's really wanting to shoot one of these things and just kind of send a message to the rest of them. But I'm all for shooting one and bringing it in for science, but the only time I'm against that is when it's your own home and it's your own property, because in these situations when people I've had several guests on, when they take shots at these things or return fire, it seems like the aggression level goes up 1,000%, and they become almost pissed off at the person there. So that's an interesting case I'm looking into right now.
Wow. And then, of course, sounds to me like if that escalates at some point, then people will start coming up missing.
Yeah, I mean, there's the siege of Hunabi. I looked into that, and I spoke to the brothers that were involved in that situation. And basically what had happened is they had bought a property out there, and they started noticing, he said, monkeys running around his property, except for they were really aggressive. They would come up, they would bang on the windows, they would walk right up to the window when the whole family's watching TV, and they would growl at them through the window. They'd look over and basically see it at the window. They'd bang on the house. I mean, they were tormenting these guys, absolutely tormenting these guys. And the brothers finally had enough. It got to the point where they couldn't walk from the house to their car without being heavily armed. Wow. They were kind of constantly getting stuff thrown at them, rocks thrown at them, being bluff charged. And he'll flat out call them monsters. He won't even say Bigfoot or Sasquatch. He'll just say they're monsters. And so him and his brother, the reason why it's called the siege is him and his brother set up in the house. And one night, one of the creatures had walked up to the back door and started banging on the back door. His younger brother tells him, I've had enough of this, picks up his rifle, charges the door, it jumps off the deck, and he shot it in the back and killed it. He said, I heard this thing die, Wes. I heard it take its last breath. It was gargling on its own blood, and I heard it take its last breath. And there's way more to the story than this, but basically they go out, they're going to grab the body and bring it back. When they stepped out on the porch, he said, like the forest erupted, and there was 5 or 6 of them came out of nowhere. A large one had grabbed the dead one, threw it over its shoulder, and they had all retreated back into the woodline. And nothing had really happened for about a day or two. And then the aggression around the house amplified by 1,000%. One of the things he said that I thought was interesting is he said he used to call for his dog. He'd go outside and call for his dog. And it was 2 brothers and a dad. One of the brothers takes off for work. the dad and the younger brother are standing out there in the driveway, and they hear what sounds like the brother that's gone. It sounds like he's out in the woods calling for his dog, except for it sounds like a deaf person. It was almost a perfect parrot of this guy calling for his dog, except for it was a little bit off. It was like a deaf person. Oh. And so they started getting the impression like they were being lured out, and it just got really bad after they shot this one. I mean, it'd be like an hour-long show of me just going over the story, but after they had shot it, everything amplified by 1,000%. It's almost like these things are ready for revenge after that.
Wow. Well, it tells you right there, don't mess with a Sasquatch. Of course, they made that series of commercials called Messing with Sasquatch, so I don't know. But,
well, and that's why I question it, about them cloaking or having superpowers or being able to mind speak, because you get these reports of people who shoot them.
I had a guest on the show. I can't pronounce his name, but he did talk about Sasquatch mind speaking. Well, again, that goes to their maybe sort of supernatural powers they have.
Yeah, and I don't want to take away from anyone else's account or sound like a know-it-all by any means. But, like I had a NASA space engineer I was telling you about earlier. He had shot this thing in the head. It had tackled him to the ground, and he had pulled out his pistol and shot this thing right above its eye. And he said it did bleed, and it screamed in pain as it ran back off into the woods. And it makes me think, if they can cloak and if they can do, why not cloak at that point, the moment he's pulling out his gun so he can't see it? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, again, this could be, well, that's the thing too. When I had experiences, I'm not thinking, go get a gun or go get a camera or whatever, thinking, is this really happening? There's kind of like a shock level there. Yeah. So you think it is possible that and what would happen if somebody actually shot one and had a carcass? What would that mean for the whole Sasquatch genre?
Well, I think that this is definitely being covered up by the government, and I think it's being covered up for a couple different reasons. I don't think it's one particular reason it's being covered up. I think there's several different reasons why it's being covered up. But I think if someone I had a kid on one time. I'll tell you. I'll give you a story. I had a kid on one time. I say kid. The guy was probably 22. He had shot one of these creatures, and it wasn't very big. It was about 6 feet tall. He had shot it, and it was running away from him. He didn't know what it was, and so like a dumb kid, he pulls the trigger, shoots the thing. And he had walked up on it. And he had said the same thing about the marijuana story I was telling you earlier. When he walked up on this thing, he said it looked human, and it bothered him. Mm-hmm. So this happened on his property. He ran back, told his dad he had shot this thing. And he didn't know what it was. He thought it was a monkey, but it kind of looks like a person. So his dad's thinking, oh, man, this kid shot a hunter. His dad goes down there, and it has no clue what this thing is. And he knows it's not human, so he calls Fish and Game. Excuse me. He calls Fish and Game. Fish and Game comes out. Pretty soon, State Patrol's out there. Police are out there. And he said what happened is they put up crime scene tape. And they cleaned up the whole area and then left. They didn't ask any questions. There was no, hey, you shot an endangered species. There was no, hey, this is homicide. You shot a person. They didn't want to know this kid's story. They really didn't care about how it had happened. They went out, cleaned the whole area up, and he said when they left, their whole area was spotless, almost like you wouldn't even notice anything had ever happened there. And so I think it is being covered up. I think they already have been shot several times over. Mm-hmm. So I think if you shot one, you could probably expect a knock on your door.
Yeah, I would. Trying to pronounce that name of our guest, talking about the mind. I think it was Kiwani Laceritus. Are you familiar with that?
Arthritis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't he the one that says that he has psychic communications with him? So yeah. Let me ask you something. Have you seen that UFO video that just came out recently near, I think, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? It's a jagged edge blue object.
I haven't. I've heard about it though. Well, it was hovering right above the base, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's outstanding video. I mean, it's almost indisputed. It was, and it made the major networks rather than just, the kind of the internet thing. And so, one could say there's a cover up going on there. If that object is there and they're denying it, then that adds credence to the fact that in Roswell they took a craft to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's probably still there. So, so whether we find one or not, it could be, this is a whole nother topic of keep the population just paying their taxes and going to Walmart. Don't let them know that there are Sasquatch creatures that exist. It's the same as UFOs. It'll keep them sort of dumbed down and not searching these things out. So, and let me, on kind of, as we get to the end then, Wes, have you had anything come to you? Any questions? Any strange? I mean, does it get to the realm of you feel like your phone's being tapped or you're being followed, or is this sort of off to the side and it's sort of an innocuous thing that really wouldn't attract the attention of the dark parts of the government?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that kind of stuff happen, and normally it's after I talk to someone who claims to be in the military and claims to know or has a piece of information they want to give me. I did the insider shows I've done with the military. Shortly after I did that particular show, I was getting 000 phone calls on my cell phone. I got the 99999 phone calls on my cell phone. And it only seems to happen when I talk with someone in the military. The last insider I had on the show, the Air Force had shown up at her place. Really? And they wanted to sit and listen through the interview. Now, these guys already knew I was going to do an interview. They knew the time. They knew everything. And I could hear them talking in the background. I said, well, I'll just call you back another time. And I hung up. And the person I was talking to sounded scared when she was talking. I mean, it sounded really scared when she was talking. Oh. And I just said, I'll just call you another time. And I hung up. But I think whenever someone legitimately within the military wants to give you a piece of information, it seems like I have that type of trouble. You're just your normal person coming on. I really haven't had too many of those issues. And it's only happened a couple times. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to concur. Now, this program's been on since 2004, and I've had numbers of military people on, and the longtime viewers can attest to the fact that there are times when the show's going and then a specific question is asked, a very deep type probing question, and all of a sudden the network goes down or the phone goes dead or you hear beeps in the background or clicks. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And so over time, I have seen that. I'm thinking, and sometimes I try to replay, well, what was that? What was it triggered that, and so, and you're right. So on the more, non-conspiratorial topics, it seems like the show runs fine. Tonight we're fine. But you may not know this, and certainly the viewers know this. I had a conspiracy guy on the program once, and the phone went dead, and he called back, and I was trying to reach him. He was trying to reach me, and he said, I called your 800 number because we have an 800 number. He said the NSA answered. So, sometimes I think they let you know.
Doesn't shock me one bit. I've had that. I'll tell you a really weird story. There's a group of guys in the Texas called the Big Thicket. Their group's called the Big Thicket Watch. And first time I ever went down there with those guys, I had never heard so many vocals in my life. I had seen tracks. That's where we had the log thrown at our head and all that other stuff. Well, they decided to start doing expeditions. And they were going to charge for the expeditions. Take people out, all your food's paid for. They'll take you into these different areas. They do track casting, all the normal stuff you do on these expeditions. And on one of the expeditions, right before the expedition, they'd actually got one on film. And they had got a great picture of a video of a Sasquatch on film. They have a drone pilot, an actual drone pilot, in their group, and he was testing out the drone as he's flying it around. And what happened was he ended up catching this huge creature walking out of the brush. Huge gray, looks like a huge gorilla walking on two legs out of the brush. And it stops and kind of looks up at the drone and then looks over at the guys, turns around and walks back into the tree line. And this is in 4K. So this is really high quality video. And I've been begging these guys to release that video. And I don't know if they are or not, but it's some of the best video I've ever seen. So they start taking these people out, and I would interview the people that went on the expeditions. And every time there was an expedition, they would come back and share their stories. They would share, one guy had his tent about pushed over. In some of these areas that they go, there is a lot of aggressive behavior. But they were getting actual results from people going down there. Well, on their last expedition, they're out in the national forest. And 6 or 7 federal agents roll in on them, like an FBI raid. Roll in on these guys. Separate the whole group, and was questioning these people. And one of the participants of that expedition said to me, he asked one of the forestry officers if they'd ever seen Sasquatch. And he made the comment, "You don't want to know what I know about Sasquatch." And then he asked him again, "Well, what do you mean when you say that?" And he turned and looked at the guy and said, "If it shows its teeth, back away as quickly as you can." And then he turned back. The guy didn't flinch. It wasn't a joke. He wasn't laughing. And basically, they had nailed these guys. I'm assuming they were watching my website or listening to my show, but they had nailed these guys. And what they had nailed them for is operating a business in the national forest without a permit. It's a $150 fine. They let these guys know they'd been surveillancing them for months, since January, and on and on and on and on. And they had to leave, or they were all going to jail. The guys, the big thicket guys, they had to leave, or they were all going to jail, and just made a mess of things over a $150 ticket. Makes no sense. How much of taxpayers' dollars did you spend surveillancing these guys looking for Bigfoot? And then you roll in with and I saw pictures of the participants had actually taken pictures of all the trucks, and it looks like a whole FBI raid coming in to bust these guys for a $150 ticket. Makes no sense at all.
Now, do they still do that? What did they end up doing?
Well, they tried to get a permit a couple times, and that the story goes even deeper than that. But they had actually recorded the conversation, and when they tried to get the permit, it was almost kind of a shakedown. The guy was asking them how much they were making, and it'd probably be a percentage of how much they're making, and they could pay him directly. But they're no longer doing the expeditions at this point until they can try and get a permit. But they've tried before in the past, and it was like a shakedown.
Why do you think they don't want to release that video?
I think one of the things they wanted to go back and do was put a person in that spot of where this thing was standing. The guy that took the video, he goes in for a lot of these oil companies, and with his drones, he can fly over an area, map it on the computer, and he can actually see like 30 or 40 feet down underground to see if there's a pipe leaking or something to that effect. The video is good enough for them to release, but I think what they're going to do is go back, put a person in that spot, and just show you a size comparison. And when you watch the video, you kind of I tried to explain to them, you already kind of see a size comparison because the two guys are standing side by side, and the creature that stepped out of the woods is still wider than both of those two guys standing side by side. They're just, I guess they want to dot all their I's and cross all their T's on before they release it. That's my best guess.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Wes, we're right here at the end of the broadcast here. Now, what is this? Are you operating a second channel, a conspiracy? You're developing something in the conspiratorial? What's going on there? Give me a little bit more on that.
Yeah, what we're doing is Duke and I are doing a conspiracy corner. And it's just other topics outside of Sasquatch that interest us. And so I put out the first show. I'm going to put up the second show tonight. And it's going to be on just weird stuff. I'm like you. There's a lot of different topics that interest me outside of the Bigfoot world. And it's kind of nice to take a break. So once or twice a week, I'll be releasing those conspiracy corner shows up on the website in a YouTube format.
Okay. So you have a YouTube channel?
I do. If you just type in Wes Germer, it pops up.
Okay, so will that also bring up? Do you have all your audio for your podcast? Is that on the SasquatchChronicles.com?
Yeah, that's on SasquatchChronicles.com. It's on iTunes and just about every podcast player out there. Okay. If people want to give it a listen. Okay, so if somebody goes just to say Sasquatch Chronicles, is there a link over to the other channel? Are you going to develop a link for that? Yeah, it's all on the website. If you go to SasquatchChronicles.com, on the right-hand side, there's a podcast episode section, and people can go in there and watch and listen to everything.
Okay. And as far as the conspiracy goes, I mean, right here is a pretty big one. You had a firsthand shock treatment that everything out there is not as it seems, that there is way more out there. You know, I've had my own experiences, which tells me, which really kind of keeps me going, is that, look, there's a bunch of stuff going on out there. You know, they've said forever Sasquatch doesn't exist, but you beg to differ. And certainly with all the firsthand testimonies that you've had, I mean, a lot of people would beg to differ. So, I mean, how many more things, and that's what my point is, how many more topics have people ridiculed or said doesn't exist, or, you know, had just poo-pooed or wrote off that are in fact real? I just don't like being lied to, Wes, and I know you don't either.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it goes back to, I was just watching a thing on the Komodo dragon, and the people would describe the Komodo dragon, and, you know, everyone outside of the island thought these people were crazy. There's nothing on this planet that looks like that, you know, an alligator that walks, and until they found the Komodo dragon. And so I kind of think I put Sasquatch in the same category. But it makes you open your eyes a lot. You know, I'm not so quick to brush someone off when they tell me something crazy now, because, you know, I've have my own crazy story. Right.
Agreed. I'm not so quick. You know, sometimes we just need to listen, you know, and because our experiences may not be theirs, maybe we can learn something for that. All right. Well, Wes, I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. I had a great time, and thank you to you, Daniel, and thank you to all your listeners. Okay. There's great questions, awesome questions tonight.
Okay. Now, perhaps, have you been watching the video?
I haven't, no.
Okay. So you know where our website is?
I do.
Okay. If you got a computer handy?
I do, yeah.
I want you to log on over there real quick. Just to where you start seeing it live stream and turn the audio down.
I just had it up. Let me see if I can pull it back. Oh, there it is. And you said click on the...
Yeah, just let it start playing. You'll see me there in the hat, and you see your picture and such.
I think it's loading.
Okay.
What do I click on here, Daniel? I don't remember exactly.
It should be a big player there with an arrow that says click here. Let me see. Yeah, it should just be a big play button there, right in the middle of the. You should see tune in radio link. Right
there. It is. I see it.
Okay, you see it. You see the video now.
Yeah, you got my ugly mug up there.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's what's. There've been a lot of pictures up there now. You had to watch the whole thing. By the way, this program will begin to replay here in about 5 minutes. It'll just recirculate right to the very beginning of the show, and then we'll end up turning that into a link to the YouTube high definition video that we've captured on another thing, and so that'll take that place. But anyway, that's going to loop all week there in that place, and it'll have a link in your bio section for the podcast and the video. But I want to know, are you a good sport?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, Susan and I went to the Ozarks, and you talk about it on a lot of time, sightings on a ridge. We went up on a ridge, and we tried to contact a Sasquatch. And by watching monsters, we learned how to try to call them. So I'm about ready to play that video.
Oh, cool.
But so we don't get I want you to hear the audio. So I'm going to have to hang up the phone here for you, or you can see. I don't know how you do that. You might mute it, but I want you to hear the audio. Are you ready? You ready to watch it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm ready.
Okay. Well, let me hang up the phone here so we have a back feed and you can turn your audio up on your computer. I'm going to show you the video we captured. Cool. All right. And here you go. I'm going to go ahead and hang up there, Wes. And so that'll be the end of our conversation with you. Just a little lighter note video. I want you to watch it, and then I'll just chat with you there as a final thing in the Skype channel. All right? Here we go.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye. All right, everybody. That was Wes Germer talking about the Sasquatch Chronicles. By the way, this program, as I told him, we'll begin replaying the main player here shortly. Then we'll put the high definition video in there. It'll also go up on our YouTube channel, podcast, and put it into our TuneIn Radio playlist. Well, for those of you who didn't watch the beginning of the show, I'm going to play this again. I'm going to play this for Wes here. This is where Susan and I went to call a Sasquatch, and we did have activity. Let me go ahead and cue this thing up here. Hang on.